He crossed the Rhine with genius, he cornered an empire with precision, and just when victory was certain, a single splinter killed the greatest mind in Europe. Europe in the late 17th century was a continent in constant motion, kingdoms rising, empires plotting, alliances shifting with the winds of ambition and fear. And at the heart of this turbulent age stood one nation whose hunger for dominance shook the foundations of the old order: France, under the brilliant and relentless reign of Louis Roman XIV, the Sun King. His armies thundered across borders, not only to expand territory but to project power, to announce to Europe that a new giant had risen. But an army, no matter how mighty, is only as strong as its commander. And among all the men who marched beneath the French banner, one name shone above the rest: Henry de la Tour d'Auvergne, the man history remembers as Marshal Turenne. By 1675, Turenne was not merely a general, he was a phenomenon. Kings admired him, enemies feared him, and soldiers trusted him like they trusted no other. For more than 4 decades, he had shaped campaigns with a precision that modern strategists still marvel at. Unlike many commanders who relied solely on brute force, Turenne believed in the art of maneuver, deception, and timing. He understood that the true battlefield existed not only in the fields, forests, and rivers of Europe, but also in the minds of his enemies. And nowhere would this brilliance shine more clearly than during the events that led France to cross the Rhine and push deep into enemy territory. Events that culminated in the fateful Battle of Salzbach in 1675. The war that set the stage, the Franco-Dutch War 1672-1678, had pulled Europe into a vortex of conflict. France fought not only the Dutch Republic, but also the Holy Roman Empire, Brandenburg, Prussia, and Spain, all aligned to halt French expansion. The Rhine became the front line of this great struggle, a river that had witnessed Roman legions, medieval kings, and now the most sophisticated armies of the early modern age. For the Holy Roman Empire, the Rhine was a shield. For France, it was an invitation. In 1674, imperial forces under General Montecuccoli, a man respected as one of the finest commanders of his era, maneuvered brilliantly to contain the French advance. 2 giants now stood opposed here, Rhine versus Montecuccoli, both masters of mobility and strategy. Their chessboard was the vast landscape of the Rhineland. Their pieces, tens of thousands of infantry and cavalry, cannons pulled by teams of horses, and supply trains that stretched for miles. But Turenne had something the enemy did not: an instinctive understanding of tempo, rhythm, and opportunity. The winter that Europe would never forget as the harsh winter of 1674-75 descended over Europe. Armies typically retreated to winter quarters. Snowed roads, frozen rivers, and starving horses made campaigning impossible. Impossible for most, but not for Turenne. In one of the most daring decisions in military history, Turenne launched a full-scale winter campaign, catching the imperial forces off guard. While enemy troops settled into warm quarters, Turenne marched his soldiers through ice and storm, striking with speed that stunned the continent. It was then Europe understood this was not a typical commander. This was a man who could bend even the seasons to his will. His winter offensive pushed imperial forces back, regained Alsace for France, and set the stage for the dramatic events that would unfold at the Rhine in the summer of 1675. Crossing the Rhine, a masterclass of strategy, by mid-1675, Montecuccoli returned, determined to undo Turenne's gains. What followed was a series of maneuvers that historians still describe as a dance between two minds. Neither wanted to risk a reckless battle, both sought the perfect moment to strike. The Rhine became not just a barrier but a weapon, an obstacle both sides hoped to use to trap the other. But Turenne, with his unmatched understanding of terrain and timing, made the first bold move. Under the cover of darkness, using misdirection and deceptive signals, he moved his army toward an unexpected crossing point. Cavalry scouts spread across the riverbanks, creating illusions of troop buildup in places where he had no intention of crossing. Meanwhile, bridge engineers worked tirelessly, constructing pontoons with remarkable speed. The Imperial army believed Turenne was preparing to cross miles away. By the time Montecuccoli realized the deception, the French were already over the river. It wasn't the crossing itself that stunned Europe. It was the way Turenne achieved it, quietly, cleanly, with minimal casualties, and with such precision that even his enemies could only admire the brilliance. Into enemy territory once across the Rhine, Turenne wasted no time. He advanced swiftly, establishing strong positions and cutting off Imperial supply routes. His movements were fluid, unpredictable, and relentless. He did not wait for Montecuccoli to choose the battlefield. Turenne chose it for him. His strategic goal was simple: to force the Imperial army into a disadvantageous position while maintaining pressure on their morale and logistics. Every march, every camp relocation, and every feint was calibrated. Officers under Turenne often said that marching under him felt like following a musician with perfect rhythm. One lieutenant wrote, "He moved with such confidence that we believed every step had been foreseen. Where others saw rivers and rocks, he saw paths and opportunities soon arrived." The approach to Salzbach. By early July 1675, Montecuccoli positioned his army near the small village of Salzbach. The terrain was harsh: hills, forests, and narrow paths that made maneuvering difficult. Both armies eyed each other across the fields, banners fluttering in the wind, muskets gleaming in the sunlight. Turenne inspected the terrain personally, walking miles, studying elevations, noting how artillery could be placed, where infantry could advance, and which routes cavalry could exploit. His officers watched as he sketched plans on the ground with a stick, analyzing every possibility. Morning mist lay in thick sheets over the fields near Salzbach, clinging to the tall grass, rising like ghostly smoke between the scattered trees. The air was still, almost unnaturally silent, as if the land itself knew a great clash was coming. French soldiers tightened their belts, checked their flints, and whispered their prayers. Across the way, Imperial troops under Montecuccoli prepared their lines with equal tension. Two armies, both veterans of countless campaigns, stared into the unknown, and at their center stood the two greatest commanders of their generation, Marshal Turenne for France and Raimondo Montecuccoli for the Holy Roman Empire. Their rivalry was legendary, not born of hatred, but of respect. They were equals in skill, opposites in style. Where Montecuccoli favored cautious elegant maneuvers, Turenne embraced speed, pressure, and creativity. Their battles were not just clashes of steel, they were contests of intellect. On this July morning in 1675, that contest was reaching its climax. The position Turenne chose, the village of Salzbach, lay in a naturally strong defensive position. Hills rolled gently toward it, offering commanding heights. Forests and thick hedges created natural barriers. Streams cut the fields into narrow channels. Turenne walked the terrain for hours, studying every rise and hollow. He paced slowly, hands behind his back, boots sinking into wet grass. His officers followed silently, giving him space as he processed the battlefield like a vast mathematical problem. He analyzed the wind direction, the soil firmness, the angles of artillery fire, and the routes enemy cavalry might take. Few commanders in European history walked ground the way Turenne did. He believed battles were won or lost before the first musket fired, on the map and in the mind. And what he saw at Salzbach thrilled him. A hill to the right offered an ideal artillery position. A small copse of trees could conceal infantry until the perfect moment. A narrow defile would funnel imperial forces if they attempted a flank. Everything aligned. He told his staff, "We will strike them here. They do not yet see it, but they will." The plan he drafted that morning would have been one of the most brilliant envelopments in early modern warfare. But before it could unfold, fate intervened. Preparing the French attack, Turenne spent the morning deploying his forces with meticulous precision. Infantry battalions moved quietly into position, cavalry massed behind the ridgeline. Artillery officers calculated angles and distances, waiting for the order to fire. He intended to use the high ground to unleash a devastating artillery strike that would break imperial cohesion. After that, French infantry would push through the center while cavalry struck the flanks. Montecuccoli would be forced into a retreat, or worse, surrounded. This was not reckless ambition. It was the work of a man who had spent his life studying how to break armies without destroying his own. The French army sensed his confidence. A captain wrote later, "Where Turenne rode, fear left us." It was as if he carried victory in his saddlebag. Montecuccoli's counter-moves across the fields. Montecuccoli watched French movements with narrowed eyes. He sensed danger. He knew Turenne was planning something larger than the scattered maneuvers he displayed. But the terrain constrained him. His forces had fewer positions of advantage. His supply lines were stretched. His cavalry lacked room to maneuver. Still, he prepared his own plan, one of defense and delay. He knew Turenne would seek to force the engagement. If he could hold long enough, reinforcements might arrive, or Turenne's daring river crossing might leave the French exposed. Powerful imperial artillery watched over the French movements. Cannons sat behind earthworks, their barrels glinting under the rising sun. The calm before the storm was tightening. The shot that changed everything by noon, Turenne gave the order to reposition a group of cannons on the right flanks, small adjustments that would perfect the angle of fire for his upcoming assault. His officers suggested he let aides relay the order, but Turenne refused. He always inspected key artillery positions himself. As he rode forward with a small escort, cannon crews snapped to attention. Horses snorted nervously. The smell of gunpowder hung faintly from earlier test shots. Turenne spoke calmly to the gunners, correcting their aim by mere inches. Then, across the field, an imperial battery fired a ranging shot. one cannonball arcing high through the sky, its whistle slicing through the air. No one paid attention at first. Ranging shots were common, but this single iron sphere, would alter the course of French history. It struck a nearby tree. The tree shattered. A thick wooden splinter nearly the size of a sword flew outward with terrible force. It struck Turenne in the chest. He fell from his horse without a word. Shock across the battlefield for a moment. The battlefield fell into a surreal quiet. Even the cannons seemed to pause as if they sensed what had occurred. Officers rushed to his side. Soldiers froze in disbelief. The man who had led them through impossible campaigns, who had defied winter and crossed the Rhine, who had never lost their trust, lay mortally wounded on the ground. Blood stained his uniform. His final words were whispered. "I did not think it was so serious." And then he was gone, the greatest general in France's history, dead not by strategy or heroism, but by terrible chance. A tree splinter, not a bullet, had ended a legend. The French army trembles in the moments after Turenne's death. Panic rippled like a shockwave. Officers stared at one another, unsure who would take command. Soldiers who moments earlier were confident now felt adrift, as if the sun had vanished from the sky. A sergeant later wrote, "It was not the loss of a man, it was the loss of our courage." The army's heartbeat faltered. The attack plans fell apart instantly. Units stopped mid-march. Artillery crews hesitated to fire. Cavalry commanders argued over positioning. The grand strategic machine that Turenne had crafted in the morning began to crumble without the mind that had built it. Montecuccoli acts fast across the field. Montecuccoli saw confusion in the French lines. He sensed something catastrophic had happened. He didn't know Turenne was dead, not yet, but he recognized weakness. This was his chance. Imperial cannons roared to life. Infantry pushed forward. Cavalry probed the French flank. What Turenne intended to be a crushing French envelopment turned into a desperate attempt just to hold position. The battle, once poised to be Turenne's masterpiece, became a chaotic struggle for survival. Retreat to the Rhine French commanders finally regained partial control, ordering a disciplined withdrawal toward the Rhine. They fought bravely, forming defensive pockets, slowing the imperial advance. But without Turenne, there was no plan, only reaction. By nightfall, the French army retreated in sorrow and disbelief. The Rhine crossing, which had been Turenne's brilliant achievement just days earlier, now became the lifeline saving the army from destruction. A legend falls, a legacy begins. The Battle of Salzbach ended not with a decisive victory, but with the tragic loss of a man whose mind had shaped Europe's battlefields for 40 years. Turenne's death shocked France, stunned Europe, and halted an entire campaign in its tracks. The fields of Salzbach grew quiet after the French withdrawal. The smoke drifted away, the clash of steel faded into memory, and the armies marched back to their respective lines. But in that silence, Europe felt the echo of something greater than a single battle. They felt the passing of a man whose very presence shaped the rhythm of war. Turenne's death was not just a loss for France, it was a loss for the art of strategy itself. For 4 decades, he had shown Europe what a commander could be: disciplined, creative, relentless, and humane. He fought not for spectacle, not for glory, but for precision and purpose. Where others sought decisive slaughter, Turenne sought maneuver. Where others chased fame, he chased results. His campaigns were marked not by recklessness, but by mastery. The crossing of the Rhine, the winter offensive, the flawless maneuvers leading up to Salzbach, these were the final strokes of an artist completing a masterpiece. Even his enemies understood this. Montecuccoli, the only commander who could match him in intellect, honored him with words that still resonate. A man who has done honor to humanity is gone. Few generals in history have earned such respect from their rivals. A legacy written in motion, not monuments. Turenne left behind no grand political vision, no empire of his own. His legacy lived in the movement of armies, in the textbooks of strategy, in the minds of those who studied war as a science. He transformed the French military into an instrument of precision. He proved that discipline, logistics, and intelligent maneuvering could accomplish what brute force never could. Generals who came after him, from Frederick the Great to Napoleon, studied his campaigns like scripture. His winter march into Alsace became a model for operational daring. His Rhine crossing showed the power of deception and timing. His approach at Salzbach became a lesson in terrain, momentum, and the value of initiative. Turenne did not write thick volumes on strategy. He wrote his lessons on the land itself, across rivers, valleys, and battlefields.